Evening. It's time for us to begin our class tonight. I appreciate everybody being here. I hope to be able to share some information with you tonight of things that are in Israel that we were able to see and how that relates to, helps us understand the Bible. And I do think the more we understand how they lived and where they lived and some of the things, it'll help us appreciate the things that the events that occur and how they occurred and why some things occurred the way they did. It's not going to change the gospel, but it's going to help us to understand the things that went on, particularly the things in the Old Testament and how they actually happened, because a lot of those are made application in the New Testament. And so I think it'll help us in that. We're going to look at, tonight, we're going to look at primarily Old Testament cities. We're only going to look at a few, but I picked some that I think are important for us to understand the land and how the nation functioned. Also, there are lots and lots of cities in the Bible, or really they're not cities, they're towns that are mentioned in the Bible. We have no idea where they were. We have just a general idea, but saying this is where that city was, or that town was. There's not enough information been gathered to positively identify many of the cities. And so that's why there's always more ongoing archaeology there. They all hope they're going to find something that's got written on, this is where you are. But it's not likely to happen most of the times. Although in Shiloh, they did find that one of the buildings there said Shiloh written right on it, and so that's a good key when you find something like that. Okay, let's begin with a word of prayer here. And Eddie, would you lead us in a prayer before we begin?
Let's all pray together, please. Father, as we come before your throne this day, we are so very thankful for this opportunity. We're thankful for Jesus who stands with us as we offer our prayers to you. We're thankful for the opportunity that we have to be able to view the pictures that Dan has brought back to us to talk about the information about the cities that we read about in the Old Testament, to learn about how these things help us to understand the events that occurred so that our faith goes stronger in you. We ask that you will be with him as he leads us in this study, and also with those who are studying downstairs, and that all will be to your glory and our edification. In Christ's name we offer our prayer. Amen.
Amen. Okay, we're going to start with the city of Dan. It's Tel Dan. Y'all know what a tell is, don't you? A tell is a mound where there are layers and layers and layers of civilizations until finally they get to be real tall, because Jericho has 26 layers of civilization. It's one of the oldest cities in the world. Hazor, we're going to look at tonight, it has about 20 layers of civilization. What that means is some people came in and lived there, developed some housing or whatever. Somebody overran them, tore everything down, spread it out, and built on top of it. And it's so there's as many as 20 or 25 layers of civilizations in some of these in these towns. Well, Tel means a mound where cities have been or people have lived. And Dan, of course, is in very northern Israel. And you remember how Dan got to be there. Went the wrong way. Whenever Joshua divided the land, he gave the tribe of Dan this land down here. Of course, the Lord was directing him in that. And the Philistine, this is down in the plain along the Mediterranean Sea. And the Philistines seemed to be the strongest group of people in Palestine at the time that they got the land. And the tribe of Dan could not, whether they didn't have enough faith or ambition or whatever, they did not drive the Philistines out. And so they went all the way up north of the tribe of Naphtali, and settled in a place that did not have many cities, much development, an easy place to settle. And there was a community there at Dan, but it was not a very big community, and it was not a military type community. So it was an easy place for them to go. Dan is up here. Mount Hermon is here, and Mount Hermon is the tallest mountain in Palestine. And when we were there was still some snow on top of Mount Hermon. And we were there in June. So it has significant amount of snow. Well, the thing about snow is it gives you water. And Mount Hermon has two major streams that flow from Mount Hermon. One of them goes through Dan, and the other one goes through Caesarea Philippi. Those two, and they come down and flow in, converge and form the Jordan River. And so they moved to Dan to settle there, and they drove the Canaanites out. And this is the stream that flows by Dan. So they had plenty of water there. And if this is the way it flows in June, you can imagine earlier in the year when they were there. The initial settlement there at the city of Dan was a Canaanite settlement, and they had mud brick walls. And this is a picture of a mud brick wall. This was preserved because it had gotten covered over with dirt at some point in time. So it was preserved. I did think that was interesting to see the type of construction. It was all mud brick walls. That goes back to the time of Egypt, right? Early in Egypt, they were making mud bricks. Now they made mud bricks in Egypt because they didn't have a lot of rocks on the surface, but they still had mud bricks here for their walls or gates. When the tribe of Dan came, they built the city of Dan, and this is the type of walls that they had for the city of Dan. I like this picture for a couple of reasons. You notice these stones are not hewn. They're rounded stones that you'd find in a field. That's the type of stones they were supposed to build their altars out of. They were not supposed to use metal shaping objects on their altar stones. They were supposed to use native stones or natural stones. But they built their city walls out of these native stones, and so that's another sign of an early construction there at Dan. This was, as I say, when they first came into the land of Canaan. Now, one thing you have to be careful about when you go to any archaeological site, there'll be some stuff that's original and some stuff that's restoration. And it's hard to pick the original from the restoration sometime unless they give you a clue. I don't know if these are original or restoration, but they're the type of walls that they had. Another thing that at Dan, virtually all of their cities had one of these. And it doesn't display real well, but this is a little stone fence around here and a lot of standing stones in that. What do you suppose the standing stones represent? Idols. They represent different gods. And this was just outside the gate of Dan. And the archaeologists told us that people, if they're getting ready to go on a journey, they come out and they pray to their God here, just outside the city. And this was fairly common. Again, showing that even amongst the Israelites, we have idolatry. And they have these, they're not shaped stones, they're just standing stones. I don't know how they would know which one of those stones represented the one they were on to pray to, but there were several standing stones in that. Another thing about the cities, and this is at the entrance gate to the city of Dan, there's this little platform that at one time had a chair that sat on it and had a little canopy over it. And these little things were the poles that held the canopy up. This is where the ruler or the wise man of the city would sit. And you talk about having advice at the gates, or they would be doing business at the gates. This is where he would sit and conduct business or settle matters of between people. And so Dan had a lot of things like this that appeared not to be too disturbed, because Dan is in a place that is not very populated. It's not had the pressure. Now, when you go to Jerusalem, everything has been turned over several times in Jerusalem, covered up, and a lot of their excavations for archaeology in Jerusalem are in tunnels now, because they're tunneling under buildings, looking for things that are some layers down in the tell. But I thought this was interesting. It was that this much of it is still sitting there at Dan. And then when a ruler comes to town, he sits there and passes judgment or makes decisions for them. So I thought that was convenient. The first time I ever went to Dan, I've been there twice now, went with Ernestine and then with Kelly. I was blown away when I came to this part of the site. You come to Dan, city of Dan, down by that stream, and you're going uphill all the way, and you're walking toward the north. And when you get to this point, there's a wall with a gate through it, and north is in this direction. You find what was an altar platform, and the archaeologists have put a metal frame to represent a four-horned altar. And there's a set of steps over here where they would carry the sacrifice up and throw it over on the altar. This is pretty much intact, the altar before the golden calf. Now that, you read about the golden calf all your life at Dan, and you go there, and there's the altar where they sacrificed. That was impressive, but this is more impressive. If you walk on up, here's where the altar was. Walk up a set of steps and get onto this platform, and here's where the golden calf sat. You go see a piece of history that's 3,000 years old that connects with the Bible. And that's one of the things about going and seeing that. It makes you realize that was a real place. Now, of course, obviously the gold's been carried away a long time ago. And this, if you notice here, these stones, you've got two different types of stones. You've got your natural stones. You've got some hewn stones. Based on what the archaeologists said, this site, they think that Ahab restored this site. And he would have added some hewn stones and intermingled with the natural stones. So it probably was all natural stones originally, but when Ahab restored it, he added some hewn stones in there. Again, that was very impressive to me. Then this is standing on the back edge of the platform facing north. And they always had their idol places on high places. You see how far you can see from here, like, you can just see a great distance. And so now this faced north. Well, why did Jeroboam set this idol up at Bethel and at Dan? So you wouldn't go to Jerusalem's way, set them up. Which direction was Jerusalem from Bethel or from Dan? It was to the south. Apparently, he did not want people to even think about the direction of Jerusalem. He had them coming to this idol to worship, going to the north away from Jerusalem. So he was pulling people away from God. I think that's something I hadn't really thought much about him, the orientation of this until I got there. And the archaeology were talking about how it's oriented to the north and not oriented. Because whenever the children of Israel in Babylonian captivity, when they prayed, they would pray toward Jerusalem. And so he's got them faced away from Jerusalem. Okay, that's kind of the things I want to say about Dan. The other city I want to talk about is Megiddo. There are 3 cities I'm going to talk about tonight. There were strategic cities for Solomon and his defenses. And he fortified. Now, these cities existed before Solomon became king, but he fortified these cities with chariots and horses and built the walls around them and deployed his soldiers to these cities so he could have control of the country. And when you see the locations, 3, the first of these is Megiddo, and I've talked about it a little bit. It's here in the edge of the Jezreel Valley. The Jezreel Valley is here, and the Harod River and the Harod Valley is over here. Another of these is Hazor, which is up here in the Hula Valley, and the other one is Lachish, which is down here to the south. So you can see why he would have something, the traffic coming north. He'd have a city here. He'd have Megiddo here for traffic coming down the coast and then this way and coming in this way, coming down to Jerusalem. And of course, trying to stop the Philistines and the Egyptians here in the south. They were 3 strategic cities for him that he fortified and built. This city of Megiddo has a reconstructed gate that was typical of Solomon's gates. And those gates had 3 chambers on each side, on the inside of them, which was typical. And then they would have a gate back here and a gate that would be a double gate and that way they to try and defend. And then if you're coming on, a lot of times if you needed to transact business and things, it would be in these gates or in these chambers at the side of the gates. Another thing Solomon had at Megiddo, he had stables. And it was interesting, the stables there, they were these big stone columns that you see in this picture. And then they had feed troughs or mangers. You know, I'd always thought about a manger that Jesus might have laid in would be some little, almost like a crib. But if it was in a stable, it was probably a stone-hewn feed trough, more like that Jesus laid in. But Solomon had the stables and chariots here at Megiddo. Here's a hitching, hitching post, a hitching rock for hitching your horses up to. That was interesting, the things you find. And then this is the picture's not very good, but this is a grain pit. I start to say silo, but it's a grain pit. They had excavated there, and they would store their grain in that, then cover it up. And they could have long-term grain storage for the people and for the animals. And I'd already talked about their water systems, how that every one of these had a water system. They had a shaft. They didn't have handrails and concrete steps, but they had what's been added for us tourists. But they had a shaft that you could go down and get water inside the walls of the city, again, for time of protection. And here is standing at Megiddo looking out across the Jezreel Valley. You see how that it gives you vision. The location of Megiddo is not by accident. It's there so it can be visually observed, the valley. And I don't have a picture behind me, 180 degrees from this. Looks back to the mountains and the breaks in the mountains and the road that comes out of the mountains. So the people stationed here at Megiddo would have a watch group in the front and a watch group in the back. Would be the way that they were. The next city I want to talk about is Hazor. Hazor doesn't get a lot of press most of the time from us, but in Joshua, the 11th chapter, Hazor is the chief city of northern Canaan. And the king of Hazor, when he saw the children of Israel come into the land of Canaan, he organized all the kings, the sub-kings around him, and formed a unified army to try and turn the children of Israel back. But I won't read the first part of the chapter there, but Joshua trusted in the Lord, and they overcame this combined army. I'm going to read verses 10 and 11. Then Joshua turned back at that time after he defeated the king. But let me read verse 9. Joshua did to them as the Lord had told him. He hamstrung their horses and burned their chariots with fire. I think that's interesting there, that he did not capture their horses and chariots. He destroyed them because God did not want them to trust in horses and chariots. He wanted them to trust in him. So Joshua follows the lead. Then he turned back from following the army and captured Hazor and struck its king with a sword, for Hazor formerly was the head of all of these kingdoms. They struck every person who was in it with the edge of the sword, utterly destroying them. There was no one left who breathed. He burned Hazor with fire. So Joshua destroyed Hazor. It's, as I said earlier, it's up here to the north of the Sea of Galilee in the Beulah Valley. This is a picture of a cover over. They've excavated and found the Canaanite temple that was there in the king's palace. What is interesting to me in this picture, this is a civilization layer here, but this is a burn layer that corresponds in date to the date that Joshua destroyed the city. Now, that's another piece of evidence. You go and you read the Bible, and archaeologists find pieces of evidence, just like at Dan, they found the platform where the golden calf sit. Here they have found the evidence that indeed the city of Hazor was burned. Not all the cities that Joshua captured were burned, but Hazor was, and the Bible states that. This is the gate that's Solomon built there at Hazor when the Israelites came. So again, that would be a layer of civilization above the Canaanites. Solomon. Probably going to some of these sites now is they've excavated and found some Canaanite stuff, but to get to the Canaanite stuff, they had to excavate through the Israelite stuff. Well, they've picked the Israelite stuff up and moved it over here and set it down, just so you can see the Canaanite stuff. So when you get to one of these sites, the things that you're looking at may have not sat where they said. That's interesting to me that the archaeologists do them. There's two things I think they're interested. They're interested in information, but tourism drives their budget. And so they want to make sure we can see something so we keep coming back, is what they're doing. So Solomon fortified the city. He fortified Hazor and put troops and chariots there for them. This is a picture of a Israelite house that they found, and it was a pretty good size, but they verified by the pottery and other things that this was an Israelite dwelling. It's not. They did tell us that it's not located where they found it, because they had to move it so they could dig some Canaanites stuff. And inside that Israelite house, I don't know how well you can see it here, but this is an olive press. They have woven baskets that you have an opening and put olives in, and they're real thin, and you stack one on top of the other. And you have this bottom stone has a groove chiseled all the way around it, and then put a stone on top, and then they have this long pole that's got a prop under it. Now, it takes a prop out and they add weights out here, and it gradually squeezes the oil out of the olives. This house must have been a fairly affluent family because they had their own olive press within the house. And so I think that was interesting. This is standing at Hazor looking out over the Beulah Valley. Beulah Valley is a very beautiful valley on the western side of the Jordan River. And so you can see why, again, Hazor was here. You can see great distances, and if the army was coming, you could prepare for the army. And this is a view from I do have two views here, one to out over the valley, and this is back toward the hill country, which is behind Hazor on the backside. And you see there's a road coming down out of the hill country, and I guess if you were coming out of the hill country, you would have come in that way. Of course, that road probably, I'm sure, is different than it was in that day. Okay, so that's Hazor, Megiddo. Now I'm going to look a little bit at Lachish. Lachish is far down on the southern end of Judea, down near Philistia and the Philistines, and also it was primarily put there because of the Philistines and the Egyptians, as they would start their attack from Lachish. Again, Solomon fortified it, and he had chariots and horses there, which is a sign of his not trusting in God. What I have here is this is a picture of a display there at Lachish. And I want to point out they built a mound with really steep sidewalls, and they built a wall on top of the steep sidewalls to make it, if you're trying to attack Lachish and you're trying to claw your way up a steep wall, and I'm up in Lachish throwing boulders at you, you're not going to be very successful. So this Lachish, and when they fortified a city, this is generally the way they did it. They'd put a steep approach, put the walls on top of that, and then have a way they could defend themselves. And Lachish was fairly well fortified by that. Other thing that they did, the entrance way to Lachish was up this ramp here and through a gate. And this was a double gate. You go in this gate, and then there was walls all the way around. If you got through that gate, there'd be people throwing stuff down on you, hot oil or fire or whatever they had. So it was very well fortified. But they had you walking up the hill with your right side exposed to this wall. Now, why would they have this entranceway formed this way? Well, it's because most people are right-handed. They carry their shield in their left hand, and you're walking up the wall exposed on the right side, and guess what the archers on the wall are doing? So they had strategies, is what I want us to see. They had military strategies, and even though they were not, the modern technology, they were smart people, and they used their strategies for their defense purposes. And so we're going to see just a minute how Lachish fell, but I did want to show you that now. This is just inside the gate at Lachish. And this is Luke Chandler standing here. Kelly's wandering around somewhere, he's lost. But this is just inside the gate, and this is a room that he explains it's a shrine room. And it's got two compartments in there, like the holy part and the Holy of Holies part. But back in the Holy of Holies part, it's got two shrines, one for God and one for an idol. That became a common problem among the children of Israel. They would worship God, but they would still carry around their idols with them. And so, again, archaeologists have found evidence that verifies what we read in the scriptures here at Lachish. This is on the top of the hill at Lachish, and this was where their primary, Lachish was not a real large, it was not near as large as Hazor. Hazor was 200 acres. So it was a pretty large city. It was the largest city in Canaan when the children of Israel came in. And Lachish was only about 20 acres. So it's a much smaller city. It was more of a defense place, whereas Hazor was a economic center when the Canaanites were there. But you can kind of see in the background here how you can, if this is the governor's or the commander's quarters, how he can see this is the road to Egypt. So he could sit there in his easy chair and see the road to Egypt and watch the road to Egypt. And I thought that was, again, they're up on a hill, elevated, so they can see in all directions. And then this is over the edge of the mound, looking back toward Egypt, and you could see if any troops were coming from Egypt. This next picture, I've got a couple of lines on it. This picture is taken back at the ramp up to the city, starts right here and goes along this side up to the main gate. The original dirt was more like this on this edge of the city. And whenever Sennacherib came, he built a siege ramp from back here all the way up. So he didn't have to climb that steep bank, and his troops didn't have to. And they breached the city because they built a siege ramp. Now, that's not something you would do overnight, but he had time. The people were all locked up, but he did come in and build a siege ramp and breach the city. The archaeologists said that siege ramp was still there until they began their archaeology, and somebody moved the siege ramp out of the way before they figured out what it was. But part of it is still there. I thought that was hilarious. Even the archaeologists make mistakes in their digs sometimes. And this was kind of a graphic they had there to represent a siege engine that was going to attack that side. You represent a couple of soldiers in there, and they got a battering ram, and then a couple back here firing over the top of it. That's how they would have worked their way. Once they got the ramp built, they would have pushed basically sleds with shields on them. They would have pushed up that ramp with a group of soldiers until they got breached the walls of the city. This is an inscription in Sennacherib's palace. And it says, Sennacherib, the mighty king, king of the country of Assyria, sitting on the throne of judgment. Before or at the entrance of the city of Lachish, I gave permission for its slaughter. He takes credit for breaching the walls of Lachish and entering the city. Next thing here is a group of clay tablets. Whenever they excavated in the gates there at Lachish, they found a group of 20 clay tablets. And they have various things written on them. I won't read all this to you, but basically this set of clay tablets is communications between a field general and a commander who is at Lachish about what's going on in the time of struggle. And these are from the time probably after Sennacherib conquered Lachish. The Israelites did restore it under Hezekiah, but then under Hezekiah, of course, Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonians came. So if we're getting close to the time that Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonians came, these tablets are from that time, and they're about some of the conflict and difficulties that were going on. And they think that these tablets they would send them to Jerusalem so that the king could know what was going on at Lachish. I want to talk about these three cities now and link them together: Jezreel, Samaria, and Mount Carmel. And the person that had something very in common with these three cities is Ahab and Jezebel. At Mount Carmel, of course, is over here on the coast, and Jezreel is here. Jezreel is where Ahab and Jezebel had a summer palace. And if you remember, whenever we had the contest up here with Elijah and the priest of Baal, Ahab runs or takes his chariot down to Jezreel, and Elijah runs down to Jezreel and beats Ahab there, trying to beat the rains. Well, they would have run down the Jezreel Valley from Mount Carmel down to Jezreel, where they would have run. And then Samaria over here is the other city in this, and that's the city that Omri, Ahab's father, made the capital city of Samaria of the northern kingdom. This is a statue at Mount Carmel of Elijah slaying the prophets of Baal that got them down under his feet. He's got the sword slaying them. This is a picture of the archaeological site of Jezreel. Now, we were not allowed to go up there because there was no bus parking up there, and that dig is not open for the public to see. But just imagine that somebody had a vineyard down here on the slope at Jezreel, Naboth. Now, I don't know if it's right here or back around that side of the slope. This stonework and up here in the trees, that's where the summer palace was. Although we didn't get to go in there, but that's what they told us. And of course, you might have seen some blood on this stonework. You'd been there at the right time when Jezebel was thrown over the wall. This is a photograph of the palace foundations in Samaria. And it was on top of a hill, and I'm just going to go ahead and jump over to this. I'm on the very top of the hill of Samaria, and I'm going to do a 360 with my camera here. And you can see in all directions, even though it's in the hill country, you're on top of the hill. Omri moved the capital from where it was to Samaria for defensive purposes. Omri was a general, and he knew what defenses were. And so he moved, and he actually bought the hill and moved his capital there. And of course, Ahab gets a lot of credit, but Omri was the real general in the family that accomplished a lot of things. Okay, these tourists get in the way of the camera all the time.
Those are Samaritans.
They were on the tour with us. They're obviously tourists. Okay. Now I want to talk about Bethshan just a little bit. It's significant. It's located over here where the Jezreel Valley joins the Harod Valley and comes down to the River Jordan. Bethshan was right here. It was really more significant in New Testament times than it was in Old Testament times, but there's one really significant event happened, and here's the tale for Bethshan. There are several layers to this, but somewhere along in here would have been Bethshan when Israel was there, whenever Saul was king and his sons were king with him. Do you know what happened at Bethshan? That's where the Philistines nailed Saul's body to the wall. So it would have been somewhere along on the wall of this city that they nailed Saul's body to it and his son's body to it. And so I just think it's interesting. Now in New Testament times, or by the time of the New Testaments, the Greeks and the Romans had made Bethshan a commercial city. If you've heard of the Decapolis, that was 10 major cities that the Greeks and Romans built in this region. This is the most westerly city. It's the only one in Palestine. And if you can notice from the bottom of this picture, it was a tremendous Greco-Roman city. We had a theater. It had Roman baths. It had a stadium. It had just all sorts of the full venue of Roman, Greco-Roman facilities. Then after the Romans in the Byzantine Empire, the Byzantines built churches there. And I thought what was interesting here was this. You can't see it very well because up here, but this is a mosaic floor. I can't imagine, when you get tile now, a little bitty tile, they're already glued to a piece of paper and you just put them down on the floor. They laid this mosaic by hand, one little 1 inch square at a time. and it's beautiful. And then this is the remains of a Byzantine church baptistry that had been there. So it was, Beth Shin was very active in the time of Christ. And anybody coming from Galilee, around the Sea of Galilee, were coming down the Jezreel Valley, would come together at Beth Shin and go down the Jordan to Jericho, then up to Jerusalem. And so I'm sure that Jesus and the apostles passed through Beth Shin on more than one occasion as they were traveling. And then finally, in the year 749, they had a big earthquake, and it destroyed that. And it's not been inhabited since then. And so, okay, that's kind of what I wanted to show you tonight. I did make it through with holding just a few more minutes. Those are I didn't even talk about Jerusalem and Jericho. I think we've seen a lot about Jericho, and we're going to talk about next Wednesday night. We're going to talk about Jesus's ministry around the Sea of Galilee, his ministry in Jerusalem, and some of the things like that. And I know I won't have enough time, but that's what we're going to cover, and that'll be the end of it. So thank you very much.